Hey friends, it's been Michael. We'll have to describe this to people. It's been 2 weeks, but we're welcoming you back to the Regeneration podcast. I don't know if we ever made a claim that we would be basically consistent 52 weeks out of the year. When I got into this gig with you, I'd done some reading on it and said like consistency is not Emerson's or whoever's, hobgoblin of fools, small minds or whatever that quote is, but but that's basically what we've done. So I had some transition in my life, nothing bad. And then last week we didn't put forth a podcast. Maybe some of our listeners missed us. What do you think?
I missed us.
Yeah.
They may have, I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
But the world has changed remarkably since then.
What do you mean in particular?
I mean, 2 weeks ago today, when we talked, wasn't that Martin Shaw? I believe it was.
Yeah, that was great. Well, he was something else, wasn't he?
And I told you that there was frost on the top of my truck that day.
Yeah, right.
And since then, we haven't had any rain, and we had a week of temperatures around 90, which burned up the pastures, one pasture in particular.
And then Wildfire Mageddon came.
And that bizarre stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so these for those that don't know, being in Michigan and upstate New York, respectively, we were yesterday parts of the day, we were at the highest, weathermen, they love creating scales for things, but we were at the worst end of the particulate matter all day. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And they said
was
like
the air really thick there?
Oh, totally thick. I guess I should have posted pictures. The sun in midday, there was not clouds, but just the smoke. You were looking at it, but it was for a while it was cool, then it became haunting, But
Did it look like this, Mike?
Yeah, that was the same light. Is there a sun in there? Michael, for those listening on podcast, he just showed a poster from Blade Runner.
Blade Runner 2049, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a friend of mine who's an Anglican priest or Episcopalian priest posted a picture from that.
Yeah,
and he's from New York too. It was a funny comment. He said, anybody want anything from the grocery store? I'm heading out.
Wow, yeah. Did you that is funny. Did you get it bad? Like we were really, really bad.
Not as bad as you, but it was bad.
Yeah.
It actually affected my breathing.
Yeah, me too. I would say my wife, when the weather changes like that, she'll get a migraine or a headache. Mine is usually even though obviously it's more based in the lungs, I felt like my digestive tract get kind of messed up for a few days.
And I spend most of the day this time of year, I spend most of the time outside.
Yeah, right. Same. And we had that crazy drought. We were just in a lucky pocket today. We got roughly a third of an inch.
Nice.
Wouldn't you be, you would die for that.
I would. Well, we're supposed to get
most of the surrounding area. It's almost like you used your cloud buster.
Well, here's the thing.
Tell me how it worked.
I was trying to use the cloud buster, and I did get some rain. Didn't hit us. Well, it hit us a little bit, but got it pretty close. But then, I kept trying. It wasn't working. And Bonnie said, maybe you should use it to clear the atmosphere before you try to attract moisture, which I thought was a brilliant idea. And I did. And today, I don't know if it's because of the cloud buster or just conditions changed. Today was basically clear like a normal summer day.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then we're supposed to get rain, I think, tomorrow or Sunday.
Now, cloudbusters, can you even try it? I guess when we did the episode on it, if there's no clouds, you're just, as they say, shit out of luck.
You can still draw moisture over.
Well, yeah, that was a good episode. We got a lot of comments on that one. People liked it. And today, friends, we can kind of seed. Oh, wow, Mike, I should show you. I'm broadcasting from a new area, so I don't want to mess with my computer. Delightful, delicious. It's wet. It comes down. What am I talking about? It's rain. It's falling in Hemlock, New York. It just started again. We're getting rain. Yeah. In a couple of weeks, or next 2 weeks, we're having, I think both names are familiar to many. We have Eugene McCarraher coming on, his monumental book, The Enchantments of Mammon. And that I think could even come up today with our subject. And after that, somebody I've had the pleasure of spending long periods of time with through the monastery and lectures he's given in the area, the theologian William Bill Kavanaugh. He has a new book coming out, and have I sent it to you yet, Michael, online? Okay, it's on idolatry, so I'm going to send that to you. But he said, should we talk about that now or something else? We're going to talk about kind of the migration of the holy And then we'll have him on again closer to the publication date of his book on idolatry. And we'll be the first ones to kind of break that type of long discussion on that. But Bill is an exceedingly interesting guy and helps us kind of reconceive categories we take for granted. But today we're going to talk, friends, about, I was chatting with Michael before the podcast. It's implicit in so much of what we talk about. It's been mentioned probably over 200 times, but we're actually going to focus on Sophiology. And I thought it would be kind of a primer. And I thought we would hang the discussion on the book based upon which Michael and I met, which was The Submerged Reality. I had written a review for a common friend, Elias Krim's website. And I think I sent it at a busy time. It never got published. I loved your book so much. I told you that I had a review. You called Elias and said, publish it. And then I also thwapped it on Amazon.com. But the way I wrote that review was to single out, having been kind of pretty well read in the Russian Sophiologists, I singled out a bunch of kind of categories that I think unpack it. And so I'll be, it's kind of like me interviewing you a little bit, Michael, but, and I'm not going to read any part of my review, but, Rowan Williams, no dummy at all. He had some good thumbnail descriptions. He said, that Sophiology's kind of wheelhouse is the area of overlap between the divine and created life when, and it's involved with the problematic. Problematic is a big word for Sergius Bulgakov a lot, but how God creates a world that is both free but not alone, as if drifting in space, far removed from the creative attention, the creator's attention and care. And what do you think of those ways of getting at it to begin with?
Well, it's a problem. It's a problematic because it presents something to us that it doesn't have a received category for reception. I mean, at least in traditional Catholicism or Orthodoxy, and even Anglicanism.
Can you think of any intimations of somebody exploring? Maybe mystics talk about it without naming this area of overlap.
Well, yeah, that's why my book's called The Submerged Reality, because I think it percolates throughout, not every place in the traditions, but it's there. But very often it's there, and there's no vocabulary for it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, through history, there has not, because you can see it in Hildegard of Bingen, for instance.
Yeah.
Right, when she talks about the greening power, or you can see it in St. Francis of Assisi. But there wasn't a vocabulary to articulate it until two things. Until Jakob Böhme, the Lutheran German mystic of the early modern period of the 16th century and early 17th century, he was the one who explicitly connected the Sophia of Proverbs with the Virgin Mary. Right. And so that gets picked up, well, right away. It gets picked up in German pietism, but especially in who are called the English Behmenists. And that's people like John Portage and Jane Ledd and Thomas Bromley, a group of people who later have been called by the title the Philadelphians, the Philadelphian Society.
Big interest of yours.
And they were deeply influenced by Böhme, but they really took up this idea of Sophia that's in his mystical writings, right? And
do you think you can get to Sophiology just by taking the Sophia of in the wisdom books and playing with it? Do you think, is that what Jakob Böhme did, or do you think it kind of came from mystic revelations? Did he just read scripture and say, wow, nobody's talked about this, we have
probably because the Lutherans were not using the wisdom books, right? So that's not part of the Protestant canon. But you can't miss it in Proverbs
right
8.
I agree. Yeah.
And but then I think what happened though is this was the missing piece. This is the missing in Trinitarian theology. What's the unspoken force? And it's the Virgin, right? It's that which makes divinity palpable to the senses.
Mm.
So that's in one way, metaphysically, it's Sophia in nature, the created Sophia or uncreated Sophia, who makes the divinity palpable in the workings of nature. Like I mentioned before we went on the air, that today I caught a swarm of bees. And for me, that's a bee colony is almost the archetypal Sophianic image,
Mhm.
right? And there's such a wisdom that makes these things work. I don't even know how they do it, but it just works. I mean, there's
Yeah,
so many
yeah.
weird things with catching bees. One way to catch bees, if they're swarming and they're flying still, if you take a pot, like a pot and pan, and you start slamming them together, they'll come down and land.
Hmm.
And what I did, so I caught them out of a neighbor's lilac bush and put out a sheet in front of the hive I prepared for them, and I just dumped a box of bees on the sheet, and they just walked right into the hive.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of
yeah.
just stunning how this happened.
Isn't it? And so, on the bee thing, just, and it might even um, guide how you unpack this a little bit. We've both read and we appreciate so much Soloviev's Magisterial, The Meaning of Love, right? But we've been our brain has, and our imaginations, more importantly, have been so atrophied by Darwin. But
Yeah,
in the simple images Soloviev draws of that the insect world, I'm thinking of bees, that it's the exterior, that they there's one mind,
yeah,
and they have this constellated consciousness because all their definition is on the exterior. Then all of a sudden you get total simplicity of form on the exterior with the fish. Think of the
yeah,
simple way people draw a fish with like a triangle and that kind
yeah,
of oval, and the beginnings of the interior, right? And so we have the interior life that's been developing more pronouncedly, certainly since the incarnation, seminally. And Sophiology, is one way I think of it, is it's summoning us to the recapitulation of the insect world. But when we get, the insect world of the technostructure is different. We can go into that.
yeah, absolutely.
But that way that we're interior now, but also, and this is the Trinitarian notion of Sophiology, it captures that portion of how there's total individuality, but this is the oneness that's implicit in the total
Right.
individuality, right?
And that's where I think of, for instance, one way I think about it is and it wasn't actually until after I wrote the Sermon Reality that I encountered the work of Margaret Barker, who has been excavating First Temple Judaism. And her argument is that the worship, the veneration of wisdom was a big part of that culture until the reforms of King Josiah, when at those reforms, there was an exodus of quite a number of Israelites who went to North Africa, to Egypt, right, to
You
Alexandria.
find this in
That
Jeremiah,
is
of course.
where
Yeah.
the wisdom books were written,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So they carried that in anyway. So I think there's that, but there's also hints throughout the Old Testament and even in the New Testament, and this is Barker talks about this, that suggest that this is the missing part. And really, where I was going. So if you look at Proverbs 8, when Sophia, or wisdom, is accompanying God at the creation, right? And she speaks in first person. I was there with him when he created everything, etc. But then Sophia is also present at the recreation of the world at the incarnation, where in Proverbs, Sophia is quite literally the handmaid of the Lord in the creation. In Luke, chapter 1 of St. Luke, or is it chapter 1? I think it's chapter 1. Sophia is likewise participating in the recreation of the world at the Annunciation, right? Behold the handmaid of the Lord, right?
Yep.
Let it be with me according to thy word.
Yep.
And I think that's important.
Yeah.
And I think these are things we forget about, or we don't. We have never had a system ready to receive that. I think this goes through church history, right?
Yeah.
Because I think so many of the church fathers and early times were influenced by Greek philosophy, and in particular, I'm thinking of not only Plato
Mhm.
with the idea of the ideas, but with Aristotle and the idea of the categories. And this really
Right.
became a big deal in scholasticism, right? You got to have a category,
Mhm.
right? You have to have a system. Well, then you get the Sophia thing. It's like, wow, where does this fit in the system?
Mhm. Right, right,
I
right.
don't know where to put this. So we're going to make wisdom part of Jesus,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Sometimes, sometimes when I map out what I think is a template from it, certainly if people want to get a basis for it, it would be something you're familiar with, Michael, is, Barfield's template from original participation to alienation to final participation. If we look at that original participation, which could be seen as like the womb-like existence of a baby in its mother's womb, or the Garden of Eden, or even the paradise in which the Buddha grew up, like a paradisal garden. Um, when we talk about in the oh happy fault of Adam, sometimes I wonder, when you look at Greek mythology, or not even Roman mythology too, you see how the divine nurturing mother can morph into the she-wolf that devours her own young, right? And there's this kind of, there's the dark side of something. So sometimes when I'm kind of, in one sense, mapping out this, and let's be honest, the same paradigm is there in the best of Western classical music. You have this original harmony, discord is introduced, and then it's woven into in the final movement to a higher harmony. But sometimes I hear myself say, and I've never really tried to unpack it, I'll say, in the history of the church, because we talk about Margaret Barker, we read her and we say, oh my God, this was lost. But I can almost see how the divine feminine at one level has to be repressed. The devouring mother, the Rapunzel figure who locks her daughter in it. Well, the Rapunzel's mother, this notion of how we can helicopter parenting. So we repress it at one level to heighten, the drawing back in to the oceanic oneness. When somebody was only a member in the early Greek city-states, you would have only been known as not your individual name, Michael Martin, but Michael, son of something. You were seen in a matrix. So to get to the glory of the individual, the divine feminine is repressed at one level. Then we see it in the book of Revelation summoning us forward.
Right.
How do you put something like that in conversation? You and I have never talked about this. I've never talked about it with anybody. How do you put that in conversation with something like Margaret Barker?
Well, I wouldn't say repression as much as exile.
Okay, yeah, and that's
Right?
Sophia in exile, right?
Sophia in exile. I mean, that term Sophia in exile from my book Sophia in exile. That's a idea borrowed from Gnosticism. And David Bentley Hart, who was on the show, has a book based on exactly that idea, which
The Hymn
is
of the Pearl and
Gaia, which we talked to him about. But the idea, and it's not only exile, but it's humility, right? Because this is the handmaid of the Lord.
Yeah.
Right. And God works through Sophia, you could say. And I don't know, people are going to say, so does that make Sophia a goddess? Or I don't know how to think about this. Those are your words. But divine being, yes. I mean, I think the Catholic churches and the Orthodox Church are pretty close with the way we think of the Virgin, especially as co-redemptrix.
Yeah.
I think it's important, but her absolute humility is what allows that to happen. And I think what happens, I often connect Sophia or Sophiology to phenomenology, right? Because the idea in phenomenology is not to grasp, it's not to impose your will on that which you're beholding, but to allow that which you're beholding to awaken or unfold as in your beholding, with resisting the idea to grasp, and not only to grasp in a way to possess, but to grasp in a way to understand, right? And that's why people get frustrated with me because they ask me for a definition of Sophiology. I'm like, well, I don't know about definitions.
Yeah, and I'm with you. That's why today's episode, that's going to be so good, because again, neither you or I want to define it. Do you think Martin Shaw was brilliant on I asked him what would he change with like graduate schools in theology or seminaries, mandatory courses on phenomenology, and the praxis of it. And the other thing he said is like, give 12 secret names to a tree.
Right.
This idea of
Right.
having to watch it for a long time where it presents itself and it kind of names itself to you.
Well, and he was right too, I think, because I even wrote about this. Where when Martin said, if we could have is is there a possibility for a phenomenological Christianity? Because
Yeah.
if there's not, what
Let's
is it?
sell
It's
the
just a bunch
farm.
of
Yeah, right.
concepts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If it's not discoverable, then
Mhm.
it's just we're just lost in somebody else's, or as Blake says, right? I must create my own system or be enslaved by another man's.
Yeah.
We're kind of enslaved by the received tradition. And that's just why I think, at least the way I talk about Sophiology, turns a lot of people off or scares them off, because what about the tradition? What about
Mhm.
well, those things are all good too, but you can't let them become idols. You can't become so solidified that you can't let go. I always it's like with students, when well, the hardest thing for students in college to learn how to do is to not write a college paper.
Mhm.
So I have this one, I teach them, I have one course, I teach the composition course, right? Or teach them how to write a paper. But I have this other course I teach, I think it's called persuasive writing. And I tell them, okay, here in this class, you're gonna learn how to not write a college paper,
I don't
but
think I ever wrote a college paper,
but
but yeah, but your
still
point is so
to
well
write
taken.
in
Yeah,
order to
yeah,
persuade somebody,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, how can, and they can't do it at first.
yeah.
They're terrified.
Mhm.
But my footnotes, I miss my MLA,
Mhm.
like let go of that stuff. And we do the same thing with received traditions. We use them as crutches,
Yeah.
right? We
Even
use them
somebody
as
as
crutches.
orthodox, I was reading some poetry of Coventry Patmore again. Nobody could be more, well, again, what does orthodox mean in that case? Because he was so boldly revolutionary. But he, well, it's in Angelico Press's book. It wasn't his poetry right now, but it was The Rod, the Root, and the Flower. He knows that people can have, it's shocking to us. He knows people can have experiences that makes the formal structure of the church exactly analogous to like rocket boosters that eventually leave,
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
now
because scaffolding, right?
the
Yeah.
worst is some kind of self-proclaimed guru who pretends to leave those things so early, right? So the worst is the corrupt from the best, but we can spot those people. It's not complicated because they're really, really, really annoying. Whereas a saint who left it behind is so it's just wonderful. And so we don't have to worry about that stuff. We never progress because we're so worried about what if that notion of leaving some of this behind. And I always tell people when this would be phenomenological, those people are so easily seen by their fruits.
Yeah.
Who wants to hang around with them? And if you fall for one of these charlatans and gurus, that's on you. What
Right.
need is being met.
Well, yeah,
But
that's
like
the
one of
thing.
your, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, scaffolding is really important in building a cathedral,
Absolutely.
but eventually it has to come down.
Right. Right.
you know,
Yeah.
but I love the scaffolding. I don't want it to go away. I've spent so many good times with that scaffolding.
Yeah.
Over that part of the scaffolding, we did this. Oh, it was so much fun. Take it
I
down.
more often than not with college students, it wasn't some part of their Sesame Street lexicon, but the image I use is, when if it was Bert or Ernie, I forget which one is which, when all those great musicians came on, Paul Simon, Billy Joel, and the character there, I think it's Bert. No, it's Ernie. It's Ernie. He wants to learn how to play the saxophone, but they say you got to put down the ducky. He's always holding his ducky if you want to play the saxophone. Then it becomes this great scene that goes on for 20 minutes with literally every great rock star ever saying you got to put down the ducky. But that's my
Yeah.
shorthand for some what you're saying.
Well,
One of your whipping boys, Michael, is natura pura.
yeah.
Um, into it's a whipping boy for you, and a needed one as far as I see it, because it puts a major obstacle in the perception of some of the stuff you're talking about. And we'll talk about perception more in a little bit. Describe that problem, and why we need to confront it head on.
Well, natura pura, or pure nature, which rose out of scholastic philosophy and theology in the early modern period, which is an outgrowth of nominalism in a way. So it came from the Franciscans. Rene Descartes, for instance, was trained in pure nature theology, which
100%.
which is what allowed him to come to the conclusion that, to separate the world from the supernatural and the natural, right?
Mhm.
And it's a false dichotomy, but that's how he separated. So he was only going to concentrate on what's measurable, what he could think, right?
Mhm.
And we cannot guess at the supernatural, right? And the other part of that, so the pure nature theologians and philosophers, that whole argument was based on whether or not God's grace could be absent from any place in the creation.
Right.
Right. I mean, think about that. I mean, if you ask, a teenage, say a seriously religious Catholic teenager, or even adult, how do you think they would answer that question?
They would, a serious one. I mean, their instincts, I'd say, before they got corrupted, would say it can't be. But if they were trained in the Catholic Church, they're saying,
Well,
of course,
if they were trained in yeah, they would, according to this or that, right?
Yeah,
They would,
right.
But you're kind of intuitive and instinctive
No, yeah,
understanding.
right.
Absolutely
It's
not.
unconscionable.
Crazy.
Right.
It's crazy, right?
Mhm.
And the thing is, even from the pure nature theologians and like Suarez was one of them, and theologians and philosophers, it was just speculative. They didn't think there was anything either, but they were just wondering if it was possible.
Yeah, right.
Look, it's, in a way, it's like, what are you guys even talking about?
Mhm.
Right? Why are we doing this? But that led to so much. I mean, right now, I think pure nature theology led exactly to I'm in the wrong body.
Yeah, right. Oh, 100%.
Right? Yeah. I mean, that's pure nature right there.
Yeah.
Right?
And a lot of people, when they try to get like outside of this, do you agree that we're talking about something similar to when Barfield, talked about the superstition of outness, that there's something out there.
Yeah.
So that one thing I think that turns people off to maybe what we're talking about is people are prone to quote Heisenberg, which is 100% true. He's relevant to this discussion.
Absolutely.
But so they just talk about, his work. But, when I remind people, the simple one for me is to say, for college students, even when you're measuring a glass of water, you're slightly altering the temperature of that glass of water by that measurement you put in there. So the sense that there's something outness, that we have this radical objectivity, this way of looking at the world, that there's something out there that is not, and we're going to get into the word participatory metaphysics, but quite often, we say, oh, since quantum physics, nobody can believe that anymore. But instead of giving concrete examples like the thermometer influencing the water, we tend to just invoke like Heisenberg and say that everybody gets it. And I think those of us who want to help unpack this a little bit, I remember, and I might have told the story before, but it was real to me where, you can see it more. A friend of mine who lived down the road, about 5 houses down, he had a family, and we were told that they had a sociologist coming to study the behavior of packs of boys. And I grew up literally, in the 1980s in a suburb, and our life was like Super 8. It was like, any of those movies where, 50 kids on big wheels and so forth.
Stranger Things.
Stranger Things, yeah. Super 8 was Steven Spielberg's, they called it Stranger Things. It's kind of there in ET. But the, the sociologist was kind of watching us, and he thought he was just like, he said, don't let me interfere with how you behave. But it was our worst behavior week ever. We became monsters. We tortured a kid and everything. So it's just another example of worldview, of course, changes things you're looking at.
Yeah.
So we just have to let go of that superstition.
When I'm explaining quantum mechanics or quantum physics to my students, I always go, well, scientists have concluded, quantum scientists have concluded that phenomena behave differently while being looked at. Like my kids, right? My kids behave differently while they're being looked at.
Yep.
And when I'm not looking at them, they behave a different way.
Yeah.
We all know that, right?
Yeah. It's like when Barfield says that view of outness, he goes, it's methodically fruitful, but ontologically fictitious, right? That says it all. Yeah. It can be used to control things. It's useful as a heuristic for a certain period of time and a certain thing to get us, into the scientific method that gets closer and closer to an ever receding truth. But it's ontologically fictitious, right?
Turns into an idol.
Yep. And Sophiology the field of sociology, that the the Sophiological thing takes this for granted, that
And,
we
and
get
that's
this in
one
other words.
thing that I mean, and I see people proposing this or that kind of Sophiology out there, right? And what bugs me is so much of it is just intellectual gamesmanship.
Who's doing this? Is there names? You don't have to throw
I don't
anybody
want to
under the
name any
bus.
names.
Some people are trying to define sociology, is what you're
They're
saying.
they're just trying to turn it into a philosophy among other philosophies, right?
Okay, yeah.
And which doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's why, I think there was somebody, I think they were reviewing my book, The Incarnation of the Poetic Word, saying that I have I have an anti-theoretical theory, right?
Yeah.
Which, and I think Sophiology is like that because it's not, a system.
Mhm.
And that's why the closest thing I can compare it to is phenomenology, because, and you can see this too. I'm not just making this up. This is not just, if you look through the history of phenomenology, and I would start with Goethe
Mhm.
and Franz Brentano, Husserl, Rudolf Steiner, Edith Stein, Pope John Paul II, going down the line where these people who are phenomenologists would almost invariably had a religious turn by doing it because something shown through the phenomena in which they were witnessing.
Right.
And which is why Goethe called his method reverence, right?
Mhm.
Because you feel like you're before a being, right?
Right.
And this is, and Goethe, and it's interesting. So often, some of these people who were doing that kind of phenomenology, that, and Husserl is a good example of it. It not only was it science and philosophy, but it also becomes theology, and you can also see how it's related to the arts.
Mhm.
Remember, well, I wasn't talking. So last week, couple weeks ago, I was on Grail Country. We were talking about meditations of the tarot, and we were talking about music. If you were to play a piece of instrumental music, right, and it conjures up whatever kinds of emotions or thoughts or feelings, and very often, the same piece of music will have similar resonances with different people, right?
Mhm.
Well, how can that happen? How is it even possible that would happen?
Right.
Right? What is it in this phenomenon? Because when we listen to music attentively,
Mhm.
and because music is a good example, because when you're listening to music, you're usually not thinking at the same time,
Yeah.
right? Or judging. You're just letting it happen, right?
Mhm.
And we have those moments, and where something shines through the music and overwhelms us.
Mhm.
And it's almost like a revelation of something divine. In fact, it very often is a revelation of something divine.
Absolutely.
But people have the same experience with maybe poetry or some, the sciences and observation in science, or they have it in nature, right? I mean, the kind of like the go-to example is the sunset, but it doesn't have to be at sunset. It could be any, like I was talking about the bees. It could be that there's a revelation that happens, and you realize that, and feel you have the experience that it's almost like looking at a window and you're seeing your reflection in the window, and all of a sudden you see somebody from the other side, right?
Right.
And it's kind of disarming.
Yeah.
And I think that's
I've
that's
never
a
heard of that example. That's a good one.
that's a kind of phenomenological, sociological disposition that
Yeah.
you need to cultivate, right? We need
Right.
to
And let's stay on that word
cultivate.
cultivate, because somebody, and I don't think it would have to be an ignoramus, would say that accusation that you have a theory about not having a theory, then they will say you still have a theory. Very important in your book is the notion that when you said it's a disposition, but I also want to say it's about raising our levels of perception. And in your book, you have a great quote from von Balthasar, saying, the supernatural is not there in order to supply that part of our natural capacities we have failed to develop.
Yeah.
I love that phrasing, because then the onus is on us. He's saying, dude, it's not my fault if you haven't worked at raising your levels of perception. Then he continues, The same Christian centuries which masterfully knew how to read the natural world's language of forms were the same ones which possessed eyes trained first to perceive the formal quality of revelation by the aid of grace and its illumination, and second, and only then, to interpret revelation. So the notion of raising levels of perception, here I'm thinking about just the title of Steiner's book, How to See Higher Worlds, and how disciplined it is. You need 7 steps in the moral world to raise 1 in the perceptual world. And so how about that? Like those moral commandments without the increases in the perceptual world, those become tyrannical every time. That's where you get William Blake with his justified protest about this nonsense and so forth. But let's stay with the disposition and raising the levels of perception, because I met with some people from a local graduate school, and we were talking about changes, that could be called forth in our time. It's where I went, St. Bernard's, great school. But we were trying to figure out, what I digressed with them and said, I once wrote an article for our local newspaper from my position as a campus minister. And I think it was like secondhand Ivan Illich, but it's to think that like when the Western University got separated from the monasteries, sometime after that, our universities, which are now religions in their own right, they have multiple problems you and I discussed ad nauseum. But one of their biggest problems is we are the only culture that thought people could engage in higher education without having a spiritual practice. So that in the Islamic world, you have madrasas and you have spiritual practice. In Confucianism, you certainly had spiritual practice. The yeshivas in Judaism and so forth. But I don't think it's daily mass. But phenomenology is one. But this again, kind of do your Mike Martin thing on raising levels of perception. I think it's so crucial because I also think it's an entrance point, because I do believe people are hungry for it. We can disabuse them of the notion that we're seeing farther. We're the latest century. We must seem farther. But no. I just point to like Psalm 139:13. Truly, you have formed my inmost being. You knit me in my mother's womb. How everybody felt their reins, their livers. We don't even feel them anymore. And furthermore, they cross-culturally, they knew their livers were connected to the plant milk thistle, the planet, presumably Venus. So we have fallen levels of perception. We have narrower perception that we've used for a lot of control, but this kind of wide scopic perception has regressed,
Well, I think, and it's the thing is that, if you say higher perception, it sounds like it's a hard thing to do. And it is a hard thing to do because it's so easy. And because to do that, I mean, this is where phenomenology comes in again. You just have to, in phenomenology, it's called the epoche, right? Where you bracket your assumptions, your prior knowledge about something, and just shut up and stand before the phenomena. Let it speak to you, right?
Is that harder than you're making it sound, though, or no?
Oh yeah, it's harder than it sounds. It's hard because it's so easy.
Yeah, right.
The thing is, we don't know how to do that. We don't know how to shut up, right? Especially in our day and age, and we don't know how to turn it off, right? And so one thing I tell people to do, right, which I think is very simple, and it's super healing for me, because when I get out to the farm in the morning, part of me was like, I gotta get this done, I gotta get this done. But so I always make myself, when I'm filling the trough for the cows to drink out of, I go, because part of me is like, okay, I gotta get to the next thing. But I go, wait, stop. Just listen to how many birds can you identify that you can hear right now? And somehow that kind of grounds me, right? And it's a very simple thing. Now I would not call that higher perception, but it's a stage towards it. Because it's paying attention to what's really in front of you or what's before you.
That's why like the Martin Shaw's give 12 secret names to a tree. I do want to help people. We need very intro phenomenology. The people who founded it, they might start pretty advanced. You and I've talked, I think, offline. I'm practicing it more and more. Like right now, I'm probably much more aware than I was even 6 months ago that right over here is the west, over there is the east, that's the north. The north is associated with, the earth, the east is associated with the spring and sylphs and air. The west is associated with water. It's associated with salamanders. The south is associated with heat. I mean, No, the water's not salamanders. Undines. The south is heat. It's the salamanders. It's all this stuff. And wherever you are, I try to locate myself. And I think these
Right.
are little practices like that are preparatory lessons that could be like first grade, second grade, third grade.
Yeah.
But I think we need, do you know somebody doing this hard work? Because you're
Me.
right. You're right, bracket it. But I think there are preparatory things we could do.
Well, and this is a part of the paying attention. That so another thing that's similar to that I tell people to do, when they come, like when I had last month, I had a biodynamic farming and gardening workshop, and I always ask them, okay, we'll go out onto the farm. I'll go, okay, where's the sun? And oh, it's right there. Okay, where's the moon?
Mhm. That's
And
something
unless they can see it, they don't know where it is.
So tell people how they would start practicing that. Where are they going to practice learning where it is right now?
And it's paying attention. And the thing is, the moon moves so quickly, it goes all the way around the zodiac in a month.
Mhm.
And to pay attention to where the moon is every night, and then you could always add the other planets as well. Right now, you're seeing it too. In the evening, Venus is in the sky in the
Right.
setting west, but other times of the year, Venus is the morning star.
Mhm.
So just paying attention to where you are in the cosmos in relationship to things, which is the same thing I was talking about with listening to how many birds I can identify while I'm filling the water
Right,
cup.
right.
But these kinds of practices are grounding and humanizing, and they're not fancy. It's not
No.
like some complicated Buddhist meditation or anything. It's just
Couldn't there be a
simple.
regeneration of like a childhood Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox faith formation by just doing this stuff instead of like their religion textbooks?
And
You're
this is
thinking
becoming
about
a child again. This is
Yeah.
this is what Thomas Traherne is always talking about. How do you become a child again? Well, we
Right.
remember being children, and Thomas Traherne's most famous poem, "Wonder, how like an angel came I down.
Mhm.
How bright are all things here, when first among his works I did appear." Right? And these practices help us to recapture a little bit of that we lost.
Do you have a practice that you use for memory? So think of the Memorare, even the Hail Mary, certainly the Our Mother prayer of Tomberg. The word remember is in there about 50 times. I'm exaggerating. Remember, O most gracious. So what would be a spiritual discipline of memory if you sat down and you wanted to remember something? It's a big theme. You remember people heard Tara Thiek, you and I talking about getting Peter Beagle on, the author of The Last Unicorn. It's a genius novel on memory. Do you ever just try to consciously remember things from your childhood, or how would you invoke Traherne or a discipline of memory? I've been thinking about this lately myself, so it's a real question.
When I try to do that, I don't try to enter my childhood again. I mean, by way of going backwards in memory, but to enter the disposition of a child again. Right?
Yep.
That wonder. How do we enter into that? And again, it's something you need to cultivate. I mean, so it means you have to do it on a regular basis, right?
Right. I've always seen a connection between, most popularized, very useful. Maybe it's somewhat incomplete, but The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. For me, the divine feminine. I encourage anybody, say any Marian prayer where you hear the word Mary, think of the now.
Yep.
And we can remember, just like repopulate, that if more of us were living in the present moment, we're remembering the now. So I try to take good portions of every day, just making sure I'm in the present moment. And I know that's connected to phenomenology.
Absolutely.
I know it's connected to Sophiology.
Well, this in the story of Isis and Osiris, right? When Osiris is scattered into pieces across the world, and Isis has to pull pieces and she is literally remembering him. Putting him back together, right? And it's kind of, I mean, so in a way, Tomberg talks about memory, different types of memory, moral memory, mechanical.
It's good, right? He says when we're young, I mean, people would find this fascinating. Like when we're young, we have just like we can remember all the facts. As we get older, we can only remember things by their association. And when we get older still, we can only remember things by the love we feel for them. So, I've often wondered, is there an explanation for something like Alzheimer's in that, in a more technocratic world, if we haven't saturated ourselves and our memories with love, there's nothing left, because as
Yeah.
we age, we lose that factual memory, then we lose the associative memory. All we have in those years when we should be seers and helping the world is this loving memory, and we should be speaking from that. The atrophy of the others, it could be a real blessing, but people are hitting those ages without many loving memories. We've all moved 20 times, so we don't have loving memories. That's one thing that I learned from the monastery. These monks, they love their surroundings. They go to other beautiful monasteries. I'm thinking of Snowmass, Massachusetts, up in the Rockies. It's literally a coffee table book on every page, every vista.
Yeah.
But our monks go there for a meeting of Trappists, and they miss their sighting of the hill every night. And again, where the sun sets on that hill
Oh
at
yeah.
the Abbey of the Genesee, right? And that's loving memories. And
It
when
is.
the hypermobility that constitutes our culture desiccates so many of those memories.
Yeah. And that's why it's tough for me to leave. I just feel torn away.
Yeah.
It's hard. But I think cultivating sense of place,
Mhm.
presence, practicing the presence, I think a great tool for kind of a sophiological disposition. Does that really help me? Was the the cloud of unknowing,
Mhm.
right? Where in the cloud of unknowing, the advice for prayer is, well, don't use a whole bunch of words. Okay. In fact, maybe just one word. And how about just one word of one syllable? Just use that as a prayer and
Mhm.
make it as simple as possible. And through that you enter the cloud of unknowing. Well, and I think that's this moment where the kind of veil between the worlds disappears, right?
Mhm.
And because the cloud of unknowing, I mean, that method of prayer is disarming the intellect, is all it is,
Right,
right?
right, right.
It's disarming the intellect. And this is why especially Sergei Bulgakov calls Sophia the metaxu, the
Right.
between, right? She's the connective tissue between the natural and the supernatural,
Yep. That's that
right?
area of overlap that Rowan Williams
Yes,
was talking
it's
about. Right.
important. And another person who picked up on that quite a bit is the Irish Catholic philosopher William Desmond, right?
Yeah. I think it's there in Eric Voegelin too. I've got things I love about Voegelin, things I don't, but he's great on anamnesis, memory, and he's great on the metaxu. Michael, the in your book, and I think people are yearning for this too, because I think it's very timely, setting the stage a little bit, the relationship between theology and philosophy. Right now with these questions, we'll have this William Kavanaugh on soon. And the notion that, it seems like once we realize that everything is a religion, that wokeism is a religion, university life is a religion, scientism is a religion, we know that everybody is kind of, working from a metaphysics. The notion that we believe for a long time in this country that you could set up what was called a neutral public square upon which we met,
Right.
shorn of most of our characteristics, and we could speak as, I don't know, like a desiccated human being. That was leaving fast, and so now we know that everybody has like a metaphysics, so it allows a certain type of person to say it's all theological now. And I think there's a partial truth to that. I really do. But in your book, The Submerged Reality, you think, you're associating Sophiology with a breakdown that I think is helpful between theology and philosophy. Tell the listeners how you get at that.
Well, I mean, way back in the day, theology was the queen of the sciences, right?
Mhm.
But I think what happens, and that's why in my book, what is it called? The Incarnation of the Poetic Word. You know, it's philosophical essays on literature and theology, and theological essays on philosophy and literature, because you don't know the difference anymore after a while. And
Yeah.
this is what you see in Jean-Luc
Jean-Luc
Marion
Mario.
and,
Yeah, right,
and
right.
William Desmond, and
Mhm.
I think all of it. You see this in actually the later Derrida as well,
Mhm.
where I mean philosophy, if it is a quest for meaning and a quest for the answers to the basic life questions. How should we live, right?
Yeah.
You can't help but get to theology. And I would not, when I say that, I don't mean theology. I don't mean academic theology, right? Like you have a department at Notre Dame, for instance, of academic theology, and there's this kind of theologian. That's not what I mean at all. I mean theologos, right? The word of God. That's what you get to. And this is what happens. And this is what I mentioned earlier with all those philosophers who through phenomenology came to a religious turn, because if you're being intellectually honest, you can't deny what is happening.
Right.
Right? You can't deny your own experience. Well, like great example from Edith Stein, whom I dedicated my book, The Heavenly Country, to her. I mean, she was a kind of agnostic Jew, and she was a phenomenologist. She was the assistant to Edmund Husserl. I mean, you don't get any more phenomenological than that. And she was staying at a friend's house, and he had to go out. He and his wife had to go out for the night, and so she was okay. I'll just hang out in the library. And she pulled out the autobiography of Teresa of Avila and read the whole thing in one night.
Yeah.
And when she stopped, she finished the book. She put it down. She said, "This is the truth," because she couldn't deny, even with all of her intellectual training, the revelation of truth, because that's what the philosopher is dedicated to, right? A lover of wisdom. Oh my God, right? If a philosopher is the lover of Sophia, that's where philosophy becomes, not, maybe theology is the wrong word, but that's where it becomes mysticism or something.
Yeah.
Right.
And it seems to me too that exactly what we're talking about, like quantum mechanics, outness, and so forth, that it's hard to break down theology. In some part, the divisions are fine, they can hold a little bit, but the divorce, especially as it's found in analytic philosophy,
right,
can't be sustained anymore once
well,
and so that's just a parlor game.
Heisenberg's thing, right? The first sip of the cup of science, you become an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you, right?
I haven't heard that one, but yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
How about a couple more? We've got you also, this is so implicit probably in every sentence we've uttered since the beginning of this podcast. But when I was writing the review of your book, that in order to get at a sophiological worldview, we have to question. I think anybody who's listened to us, they wouldn't listen to more than one episode if they couldn't get beyond praising too much about the Enlightenment. And they know that from, again, every sentence we utter, that the scientific revolution has got some issues. But just speak specifically to the scientific revolution again. And again, it's because it's playing into all of these things. It's not participatory. It's ignoring them. It's methodically fruitful, but ontologically fictitious. But in your book, that's a big thing. And some young people still need to be set free from that alternative religion, the scientific revolution.
And I think that's absolutely true. And that's at in the 17th century, that was going down, right? There were a group of intellectuals who were fighting against that, and they're now dismissed as crackpots. And I'm thinking of Thomas Vaughan and Robert Flood and Henry Vaughan, metaphysical poet and twin brother of Thomas. And they looked at what was happening with Descartes and Francis Bacon and the scientific revolution that was only worried about quantity, right?
Yeah.
Measurement. And they said, no, you're losing it. You're only paying attention to half the world. And so we would call them traditionalists. They were trying to maintain that traditional picture. And you mentioned with the sylphs and undines and gnomes and the other one,
salamanders.
That was a poetic language they were using to describe realities, right? There was a language of qualities, not quantities. And they knew, they instinctively knew and morally knew that this is René Guénon, right? His book, The Reign of Quantity. what's going to happen when you go into the reign of quantity is not going to be good.
No, right.
Right. And we're there right now. Right.
Yeah.
That's why in the submerged reality of what's the first chapter called? The repercussions of a left brain theology, right?
I didn't know you were quoting left brain theology in there. I'm caught up in that stuff, but you're right. I mean, obviously left brain hemispheric stuff is definitely tied to Sophiology.
And one person I do mention, I have a bit on in that book, and we talked a lot about before, is Rudolf Steiner, was part of that, not really enlightenment, more German idealism, but he was out of that Enlightenment tradition and trying to bring the spirit back into the sciences, which is why Steiner called his approach spiritual science, right? And he was he was working out of that tradition that Vaughan and Robert Flood were working out of. Now it's interesting, even today, I did this conversation on sex and Christianity today. And
who was that for? Or you're not at liberty to say?
No, it was with Paul Vanderklay's channel.
Oh, okay.
Him. And Nate was on it. Nate jumped on it.
Yeah.
But then I had to leave toward the end before to go catch those bees. But where was I going with this?
It was science.
Rewind.
Sex and Christianity. Something you were saying on the and maybe that'll come back to you. I think again, what a seminal chapter. It's so easy for us. But I know it's done pretty well on a YouTube. If people Googled Owen Barfield and the word rainbow, right? The opening chapter to Saving the Appearances, that you see a rainbow and you get closer to it, and is it really there? Do you touch it? And he breaks it down, the experience of seeing a rainbow,
right,
into detail. Then essentially goes, a tree is the same thing, right? Yeah. And that's the participatory.
And here's what I was talking. So this commenter on there was Michael Martin's an esotericist, and that's why he does this whole divine feminine thing with his bunk. But the thing is, I'm not. I mean, I don't think of myself as that at all. I think of myself as kind of a traditionalist. But my traditionalism is probably medieval or early modern, which, if you read Ficino, you read Pico della Mirandola, you read, that was, to me, that was a healthy religion. That was not only was it Catholicism, but it was connected to the cosmos. And since that time, and we know this, the church has increasingly become disconnected from the cosmos.
It has.
Right? Yep. And we know this because if you read through literature over the course of history, and English literature is my specialty, but they would mark times not by months and years, but by the festival season. So written at Martinmas, 1642, or Michaelmas, or however they're sketching time. If we look,
everything had a prior season and a tide to it,
right? And Teresa of Avila, right? She didn't have a watch, so, and she would, in her autobiography, she talks about her visions of Jesus, and she said, well, it probably didn't take longer than a creed, or it was about the length of a paternoster, right? That's how she measured time, and we don't do that anymore. And the church doesn't do that anymore.
I came up with something this weekend that I when I was running the parish, I was working with a great group of people, and we were meeting with some parents. We just began meeting with some parents about screens after Mass, like screen usage in their family, just some accountability structures. And then we started hanging our reflections on the seasons, like, that we're now meeting in Advent. What is the stuff going on? And now we're meeting in Christmas, and now we're meeting in the season after Christmas around Candlemas, and now we're meeting in Lent, and we just did Pentecost. But how like we have all these kind of truisms in the Catholic world that, like, we baptized old pagan shrines, or or Aquinas baptized Aristotle, but we began these reflections on Michaelmas. And we ended it. We're going to have a bonfire in 3 weeks or 2 weeks on St. John's Day.
Good.
And I think we can baptize. So when you're at graduate school, or at least my experience, when I take courses on liturgy, we talk about the liturgical year, but we say, gosh, It's not even that the January to December year trumps that, which it kind of does, but in fact, it's the school year that dominates everything. And I think yours truly, me and these people, what we did is we baptized that school year, which is the one we all serve, from Michaelmas to St. John's Day,
Yeah.
right? Do you see the power of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, and that's the thing. I mean, how do we?
Sophiological.
It is absolutely sophiological.
Yep.
And here's the thing, and I write in the Submerged Reality, one of the observations I make is that, you know, people who identify as neo-pagan, for instance, basically what they're doing is they're doing medieval Catholicism without Catholicism.
Right.
Right. So they're doing Beltane or solstice or whatever they're doing, you know, all their observations or all their celebratory, I shouldn't say all, but so many of their celebrations are rooted in Christian tradition, the Christian festival tradition, and the Christian folk festival tradition, right? And in fact, our buddy Addison Hart, last week, I think it was, or maybe even earlier this week, posted on his Substack just a link to and a recommendation of a British BBC television program from maybe 12 years ago called Tudor Monastery Farm, right?
Yeah, you say that's a great show. Yeah.
It is so good, and it shows the ritual year, and it shows how not only was it connected to the land and to the cosmos, but it was what connected the community.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what bound the community together.
I really think even Catholic churches should just take not just this idea of Martinmas to St. John's Day, but like let the whole textbook thing go, and let's be that institution that takes the kids outside, notices the season. Every faith formation class, call it what you will, we're aligning ourselves with north, south, east, and west, above, here, and below, and that's really all we need, and the churches will be filled.
So here, let me show you something there, Mike.
Yeah, I'm in.
1932, got the imprimatur from 1932.
Okay.
It is, get you the,
is it throw out your faith formation books and take every kid outside?
It's a Liber Usualis, Missa et Officii, Masses and Offices. And we use this for house church, for the readings, right? Because these were the consistent readings. It wasn't, I don't know when they did this, probably in the 60s, where it went to liturgical year A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Come on. That is disconnected. What's the point with it?
I agree with you. Like, it's all I know, and I can map it onto the seasons decently. Like, there's some beauty to it. And but yet I see your point. Yeah.
Well, it's not connected to the seasons. It's connected to bureaucracy. I mean, Easter and Christmas come up, of course, but in general, there's not a rhythm to it, right?
Right.
There's not a rhythm to it. It's not really a rhythm, a 3-year rhythm. The rhythm, the church, and this is what the church did for thousands of years, right? What I just showed you. And that's what the tradies are attracted to, you know? Yeah. And if you go to the Eastern churches, they have, you know, the Sunday after Easter is Thomas Sunday, and it's always Thomas Sunday, and the gospel readings are almost always consistent.
Yeah.
Right. On feasts or on these days. Now, and I mean, there's room to criticize that, I suppose, but what it does, though, is, and this is what we learn as a Waldorf teacher, you know, if you have a kid who has a learning disability, one of the things we say is, well, rhythm replaces strength.
Yeah, you've mentioned that. That's great.
Right. So, you know, slow and steady wins the race. You just keep, you know, keep at it, and you keep the rhythm going, and that carries everything else with it. Right. Yep. It strengthens the body. And that's what I think we've somewhat lost.
Yeah. I guess I'm so aware with these kind of moving Epiphany and moving all these other days. Like, I know there's a lot of nobility. Like, so my battles are mostly there, but your point is well taken.
Yeah. But you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Say today is the Feast of the Sacred Heart. So there's great symbolism in there for, you know, or if it was the same, and it is this one, if we were aware of it, we could, I'm sure, I don't know, think of images of the Sacred Hearts kind of burning like a sun and so forth. We're getting close to the solstice. Pretty cool that St. John's Day falls on a Saturday this year. So we have a church bonfire. I think it should be pretty well attended. And, you know, everybody's doing their part, I suppose.
Well, with St. John's Day, right, where I mean, it's beautiful because at that moment where the days get shorter right around that, right?
Yep.
And what does John say when he sees Jesus?
I must decrease and he
That's
must
right.
increase. Yep.
Right. Which
Mhm.
is what happens, right?
Yep. Yep. Really beautiful. I want to take a moment to because it's out of the divine feminine. I found this book very sophiological, and I think it's kind of a diamond in the rough. A monk over at the Abbey of the Genesee, Augustine Jackson, has a book. You can Google it on Amazon.com. It's called Creation Song. And he begins, Michael, by having an image. And I told him, and he goes, like, because I know it's true. But he almost pictures like minarets. But he people calling out the hours. He pictures like Mary, Elizabeth, and Anna singing to their babies, the Psalms. At that point, not so much the Song of Songs, singing. And so Creation Song is this book. And what it's really, he's trying to highlight a neglected part of Augustine. I'm going to say Augustine is the church father of the left brain kind of machine approach to Christianity. But his expositions on the Psalms are his one right brain creation. And Augustine, this brother Augustine, says that he just couldn't go, because of his past, he couldn't go into the Song of Songs. There was this great repression. But then he talks about these tributaries, the Psalms, and how through Gregory the Great, Bede, William St. Thierry, and St. Bernard, of how that married with the Song of Songs and led to some beautiful stuff. Cool for Brother Augustine. He also says it wasn't enough. There was still this kind of masculine, bellicose thing that St. Bernard, who put the Song of Songs on the map in a new way, also preached the Third Crusade. This guy is brilliant. And what he's saying is, the creation song that was sung there, but he's so aware in this book that right now he doesn't use brain hemispheric stuff, but it makes us know that church renewal is like the musical Hadestown. I can't say enough about it. It's all based on we've forgotten the song, and Orpheus and Eurydice have to discover a song again. And the notion of this kind of shit world we're living in Hadestown is the seasons are out of tune. The seasons are out of tune, and he's got to discover his song. And this book that this monk wrote, the cool thing about it, you go to Amazon.com. I'm not even saying buy it. These free samples you get where they give you a preface or something, it kind of shows the genius there. I encourage you to do it. But I'm saying that like very few people are going to buy it. It's one of these big books. And to flesh out the Song of Songs, the Psalms, he has a lot of images in there too, because he wants to make them alive. So it's probably unnecessarily expensive. But it's going to be one of these weird books that I felt as I was kind of reviewing it, really fortunate to even stumble upon it, and to think that yes, in some monasteries, some people are doing the work. Good. Producing these things. And the guy discovered the song. He's heard the psalm so much, and they're just in his body. So that's called Creation Song. You can Google that with Augustine Jackson. He's the monk. What are you reading now?
What am I reading? I'm reading a couple different things. Reading the poetry of A.E.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm reading Rudolf Steiner's
big fan
book.
of fairies, right? Fairies.
Yes, he's big on fairies. And Rudolf Steiner's book, The Book of Revelation and the Work of the Priest.
Okay. Yeah.
And also, I'm reading The Butlerian Jihad from the Dunes.
Butlerian Jihad. Say more about that one.
It's in the Dunes. My son told me I had to read it. He said, "Dad, you got to read this book because it's in the. If you know Dune, this is a prequel to Dune.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's when it's timely. This is why I'm reading it, because it's when they have a war against the AIs. Okay. And after this, they declare there can be no thinking machines, which is why in Dune you don't see any computers. Yeah. Right?
When you mention AI, I'm going to say something I've said a couple of times. Couldn't we, with this idea of raising our levels of perception, which is another way of saying raising our consciousness. Again, von Balthasar, I just loved, he put it on us. Hey, bro, it's on you if you didn't do this. So AI is going to take over you, but hopefully there can be some of us. Now, they might blow up the world. We have to be aware. But raise your levels of perception so that it doesn't mirror a machine.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's what's going to happen with education. I already think I've been seeing papers written by AI from students. Yeah. Which is too bad, because as we know, part of the idea of struggling through trying to get the right words on the page, there's an inner spiritual activity that happens as we do that. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do that, talk about part of your soul and your brain atrophying at the same time. Yeah. Right. And I think that's a real danger. And it's spiritual inertia then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, a guest coming up in the near term, I think next week and the week after, Eugene McCarraher. If our listeners want to like watch some of his YouTubes on video, kind of prepare yourself. You know, sometimes they want us to mention books we've discussed. I'll get better at that, doing some of that now. And Bill Kavanaugh, Google any of his, you know, The Myth of Christian Violence is a great YouTube lecture. Anything on the migration of the holy, any lecture Bill Kavanaugh's got. You know, if people are looking to kind of flesh out these conversations, some learning they can do on their own, we can help kind of name drop like that. So, Michael, I thought this was long overdue. You know, I was thinking about Sophiology.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so, and who better to talk to than my good friend, you know, because again, we know, I didn't know it's as pronounced as you made it sound, but people are trying to turn this thing into a science, right?
Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah. Yep. And so we'll have to talk more about that, how to kind of stop that. Maybe we have to take recourse to, I don't know. I was gonna
Well,
say
you know,
violence.
I think it's just most of the people I see doing that are kind of are younger than we are.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in your 30s or 20s, you know, it becomes a kind of an intellectual game. You're trying to gain knowledge and information like data, right?
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in gaining wisdom.
Yeah. It's
Right.
like these young guys who are listening to Andrew Tate or something, and they think like, you know, relationships to women can be put into a machine, you know. So God bless them if they want to say that, but you and I will keep on reading Dante and Soloviev and things like that.
And learning woodworking and gardening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, good luck with that new hive.
Yes,
I
thank
hope you
you.
name every one of your bees. And I think I'll post this tomorrow. Right now we're recording on a Friday evening. This should be up tomorrow morning. And look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be with Eugene McCarraher. Take it easy, buddy.
God bless everybody.
All right, God bless you. See
Take
ya.
care.